Welcome back to App Stories. This episode is brought to you by Vizzo. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well.
Automation April is still happening.
It is.
We have a fun episode today. We're going to talk about apps, third-party apps, with great shortcuts integration. We're going to have an update on where Automation April stands, and we prepared a list of apps with great native shortcuts integration, and I'm super excited to talk about. Specifically, I have two that I really want to talk about. It's gonna be a fun shortcuts themed episode for this Automation April special month once again.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get to that, Federico, I want to talk to people a little bit about App Stories Plus, because, if you haven't tried App Stories Plus before, you ought to check out what we've got to offer over there. Today, one of the main features of an App Stories Plus subscription is the pre-show, which today we talked all about the MacBook Air as a very sad story as to why the MacBook Air has become my primary computer, and also about your brand new M2 MacBook Air that you're using at your desk and recording this show on today. But it's not just about the pre-show. That's a big part of App Stories Plus, extended episodes, but they're also delivered early and ad-free, and we also deliver the show in 192 kilobits per second. That's a lot of kilobits, Federico. It's high bitrate audio. And look, I was a little skeptical when I first thought that we were going to do this, because I thought, what's the difference between that and 96, which the regular show is published in? And there is a difference. We sound a little bit, a little smoother, a little sweeter every single week with those extra sweeter kilobits.
Yes, I like that. It's one of the many perks of App Stories Plus.
Yes. And so if you want to check that out and see what it's all about and check out the pricing and sign up, you can go on over to appstories.plus. Federico, the other way of getting App Stories Plus, of course, is by subscribing to Club Premier, which is the very top tier of Club Mac Stories. For that, you get, of course, App Stories Plus, but you also get all of the other perks of a Club Mac Stories Plus membership, which is things like exclusive columns that you and I write, town halls, which are recorded usually live in our community Discord, which is yet another perk where we have all of our members get together and chat about apps and Apple and hardware and, Obsidian and app theming and all sorts of different categories there, which are a lot of fun. So we do that. And, we've got all kinds of things going on with Club Mac Stories Plus, but Premier is the best deal of all of them. You can get, for just a little bit more than a Club Plus membership, you also get that App Stories Plus subscription as well. So go on over and check that out. There's a separate URL for that, which is plus.club. So check that out and, see what you might want to sign up for. All right, Federico, let's dive into a quick update about Automation April before we talk about these third-party apps.
Yes. So the Automation April Shortcuts Contest, we have decided to extend the contest by a few days. So you now have until, and let me check my calendar because I want to be precise here. You will be able to submit your shortcuts at shortcuts.macstories.net. Couldn't be easier. You now have until Friday, April 21st. That is, if my memory serves me right, that is one day after the birthday, the anniversary of Mac Stories on April 20th.
Very good. Yes, I was wondering why you originally suggested the 20th. I wasn't even thinking about the anniversary, but I suppose that's what you were thinking about, right?
Yes. So you now have 4 extra days to submit your shortcuts for the Automation April Shortcuts Contest. You can go to shortcuts.macstories.net, and of course there's going to be multiple categories of shortcuts, but the best overall, the big winner, the one that gets it all, will win a Loopdeck Live S and a CalDigit TS4 Thunderbolt dock. So that's the shortcuts contest. Because of this extension that we're doing for the contest, we took the opportunity to set up a second workshop in our Club Mac Stories Discord server. We're going to do a second shortcuts workshop with the amazing Rosemary Orchard. Rosemary is one of our judges for the Automation April Shortcuts contest, an automation expert, a shortcuts expert all around. I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation with Rosemary to talk about some of her favorite shortcuts techniques and sort of how to approach building shortcuts, some third-party integrations. We had a first workshop last week. We were joined by Jack Wellborn, who won last year's contest. And Jack is also one of the judges this year. So for the second workshop, which we're going to do on Wednesday, April 19th, that's 2 days before the deadline for the shortcuts contest, we're going to do a second workshop with Rosemary.
Yeah, that will be really good. Rosemary's got some great perspectives on automation. She, of course, is a co-host of the Automators podcast on Relay FM. And she does a lot with home automation, I know, too. So I think
Yes.
I'm really hoping to, she can share some of her tips on that as well. And to be precise, Federico, the deadline is Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern U.S. time.
Thank you for that.
All right. I just want to make sure everybody knows that they have most of the full day on Friday to do that, so that we'll shut it off at the end of the day, my time, and then we'll start judging the shortcuts after that.
In terms of content, so for Club Plus and Premier members, I published my first part of the Automation Academy about the making of SGPT, my shortcut that is taking the world by storm.
It really is.
And that's another American expression.
You're very good at these. You're very good.
I'm so good at this now. I should keep a list in Obsidian.
You have a book, don't you? You have a book that you read at night of these.
Yeah, I love this. I love saying these things. They just feel good when I say them. But I published part 1 of my making of. Stay tuned for part 2, and stay tuned because let's just say that I spent a few sleepless nights thinking about a bunch of wild things that I want to do for SGPT. We'll talk about this soon. I published that. You published an article on Mac Stories about your usage of the LoopDeck Live S, which also happens to be, as I mentioned, the prize for one of the prizes for the best overall shortcuts winner. And this is the last thing, I also released version 1.0.2 of SGPT, which now works even better with articles from Safari, works much better on macOS. You can now use it in the services menu. You can now use it in Raycast, in Launchbar, in Alfred, in all these launchers.
Yep.
And it's got a lot of bug fixes, improvements on the Apple Watch, all the details on Mac Stories, still free to use for everyone. So go check it out, version 1.0.2. And that is your Automation April update.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, Federico, let's dive into some of these apps. And I thought this year, we did an episode like this last year, but there are so many great apps out there that have deep support for shortcuts. And because shortcuts, not really all that long ago, added more parameters and predicate filtering.
The predicate filtering, yes.
Right. Added that, there's a lot of new ground to cover. So I thought we would do a similar episode this year. And, we're going to skip over some of the apps that we covered last year. I'll put a link in the show notes to that previous episode so people can find it. But we didn't want to repeat ourselves here, but those are great apps as well. We're going to focus today, though, on ones that we didn't cover last year and dig in first with a couple that I know were inspired in part by Automation April, which I thought was pretty cool. The first one that isn't actually out yet, but should be very, very soon because I know that it's an app review, is Bike by Jesse Grosjean.
Nice.
All right. And Jesse has done all kinds of shortcuts, automation actions in Bike, which is an outlining app. Jesse's the creator of Task Paper, and Bike is a little similar, but it's not dedicated to tasks. It's dedicated to outlines, and it's got great, folding features and all the nice attention to detail of a Mac app for outlining that you would want, whether it's, indenting, outdenting, folding, all those kind of things, moving lines up and down, that sort of thing. And now with shortcuts, you can do a lot of that in your shortcuts as well, doing things like opening an outline or creating an outline and managing all the rows, whether you're finding the rows in your outline, moving them around, creating them, editing them, deleting them, all that stuff can be done right from within shortcuts now with actions. Plus, you can import and export rows. and do things like set up your views for your outlines. If you have a really big outline, you can use shortcuts to kind of deal with folding the parts of the outline and focusing in on particular sections. So if that, maybe you're writing a book and you're writing in the outline and using folding to kind of focus on the parts that are most important, you can use these actions to do that kind of thing. That'll be out really very, very soon.
Yeah, that's a super nice update, and I really like the fact that I've been covering Jesse's software since I started Mac Stories, and Jesse is still out there making great native apps for Apple platforms and sort of embracing the latest technologies. This is just something that I love seeing in an indie developer, sort of sticking around for a long time and continuously improving their apps.
Yep.
I cannot wait for this update. Now that I have a Mac again, I cannot wait for this update to Bike.
Yeah. And I reviewed it not that long ago, and it's a really terrific app. I'll put a link in the show notes to what we've written about it in the past. The other one that I want to mention too is Food Noms. Now, this is another app that we have covered in the past. It's a great way to track calories, nutrients, all sorts of things related to what you eat every day. And developer Ryan Ashcraft, he has added a couple of new shortcuts actions recently that really extend what the app can do. One is access to quick entry, which lets you create a shortcut that will let you quickly add new foods to your log, and the ability to set a nutrient amount. Those are a couple of different things that have been added, as well as there's an AI functionality in this. I mean, a lot of people are doing AI functionality for Food Noms. That means you're able to look up facts about the foods that you're logging. And there's a shortcut action that will allow you to do that lookup from within your shortcuts as well. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Vizzo, the beautiful minimal image viewer for macOS. Vizzo has a fast, minimalistic, non-intrusive UI. In practice, that means that the app renders images in the best possible resolution for your screen in an edgeless window so you can focus on your images. There's also an option to render in a frameless window, putting your image front and center. Just pick the visual style that suits you best. Vizzo gives you full glanceable metadata details for every image too, from camera lens and color profile info to the location details and a whole lot more. And if you don't need those details, they're easily hidden too. Vizzo also supports zooming in and out on images. There's even a trackpad gesture for that, and navigating through images and folders with arrow keys, sharing and deleting images, and if you have Darkroom installed, you can open previewed images in that app and edit there. Vizzo runs natively on both Intel and Apple Silicon Macs, and it brings touch bar support for quick, fast action controls. Also, you can convert image formats fast and easily with Vizzo. Visit getvizzo.app/?appstories today to learn more. And for a limited time, you'll get 20% off the app by using the coupon code appstories-vizzo at checkout, which is a great deal. So don't delay. Go to getvizzo.app/?appstories now and use appstories-vizzo to get this beautiful minimal image viewer for macOS today. We'll have a link in the show notes too. Our thanks to Vizzo for their support of the show.
All right, I want to talk about some other third-party apps with updates that are already out on the App Store. And of course, before we get into this, I just want to reiterate something that we said toward the beginning of the month, and how in many ways, when it comes to native shortcuts integration, Toolbox Pro by Alex Hay really was a pioneering app in this field. Sort of the idea to integrate natively with shortcuts and to take advantage of parameters and all the different and specific data formats that shortcuts support with the SiriKit framework. Really, Toolbox Pro paved the way for many other developers to follow. We are remembering Alex Hay, who we lost way too soon. We're remembering him and trying to honor his memory this month with Automation April. And a lot of the apps that we're going to talk about today, I think they owe a lot to the pioneering work of Alex Hay. The first one I want to mention is very much in that sort of style. This is a relatively new app which is available on macOS, but there's a test flight beta for the iOS and iPadOS version. Actions for Obsidian. I love this thing because it's weird in a good way, in the best possible way, and clever, and potentially very, very useful. And I'm just learning my way around it as I speak. So Actions for Obsidian is a really clever way to enhance the Obsidian experience with shortcuts by providing users, I'm going to try my best at explaining this, by providing users with visual actions for what is effectively under the hood a glorified URL scheme.
Right.
Actions for Obsidian reminds me in a way of the old school workflow actions. Remember before before workflow was acquired by Apple, all the visual actions for third-party apps that you could find in workflow, they were basically a UI for a URL scheme.
Yep.
So that rather than dealing with a URL scheme and encoding and the syntax, you would see visual blocks. This is what Obsidian does. Because Actions for Obsidian does. Because Obsidian, the main app, the Obsidian app, doesn't have native shortcut actions. But the developer of Actions for Obsidian thought, well, what if I make a custom plugin for Obsidian that adds a bunch of URL scheme endpoints? And what if I combine that with a native shortcuts utility? And that totally works. So Actions for Obsidian, once you install it, you point it at your Obsidian Vault, and so you give it access to your Obsidian Vault. And then you will find in shortcuts a bunch of actions to do all kinds of things with Obsidian. There's an entire suite of actions for dealing with your daily notes in Obsidian. So you can check for the existence of a daily note, you can append, you can prepend, you can find all your daily notes. There's a lot of actions for folders. You can get a list of all your folders in your vault, you can create folders, you can delete folders. There's this powerful idea of an action to check for the existence of a note. Now, all of these are things that you could do if you know what you're doing. You could replicate the functionality of all this kind of stuff with the native files and Finder integration in shortcuts. Mm-hmm. However, that will require to have a pretty serious knowledge of how the file management sort of integration works in shortcuts. You will have to know a lot of regex, a lot of regular expression syntax, and know it well. Because something that I absolutely love for actions for Obsidian is the text manipulation stuff. You have actions to prepend or append text to a note. And that normally that will require a lot of regex. I know this because I've done it myself. Like I can build these actions myself with regular expressions, but let me tell you, it's not fun. This action sort of removes the complexity, abstracts the complexity of all that sort of stuff, and just gives you one visual thing that you can customize with parameters. It's got predicate filtering, it's got everything. There's an action to replace the placeholder in a note with some other content. You can search and replace, again, that allows you to avoid building custom regular expressions. There are data view. You know data view, the Obsidian plugin does some really powerful things. There are data view query actions that pass back to shortcuts lists of items matched from data view in Obsidian. It's very wild. Nice. Now, the only limitation of this is that because it's based on a URL scheme, on macOS and on iOS, it's going to be even worse, unfortunately. You will see the little dents between shortcuts and Obsidian launching back and forth. But I think it's workable on macOS, and I'm actually talking to Carlo, the developer, to try and maybe make the experience on iOS a little more elegant. There's always going to be some back and forth because, again, Obsidian doesn't want to provide native shortcut actions, so this developer figured out a way based on URL schemes, and even though you don't see the URL schemes yourself, you don't see the actual URL, it still works like that behind the scenes. So you will still be launching Obsidian and shortcuts back and forth, but this totally works. I want to spend more time with this. Great, geeky idea for Obsidian power users.
Oh yeah, there are over 30 actions here, I think. So
Yeah.
there's really a lot to dig into and figure out. And I recently used the prepend action myself because, as you were saying, I mean, you can do some of this stuff with regex and
Yeah.
knowing how to use other built-in actions, but it will be pretty complex and require a lot of
Yes.
actions to get it all in the order. And I was able to use with this I was staring down the barrel of kind of doing all kinds of regex to reorder a
Mm.
list of notes that I
Ooh.
was saving through Dropbox. And then I thought, oh, wait a second. Actions for Obsidian has
Exactly.
prepend, which Dropbox doesn't. And so I can just use that. And in one simple step, I've prepended something to my Obsidian note, which is where I wanted it in the first place. Federico, another app that we've seen this year really add fantastic shortcut support is Things, the task
Oh yeah.
manager from Cultured Code. And Things has a really interesting history with automation. It has always had one of the most extensive URL schemes out there, and in fact
True.
has a web page that has a tool, like a web app
Yes.
tool
Oh
built
my God,
into
I
it.
forgot about that.
Right,
Yes.
where you can kind of go through and pick the various components you want for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish with your task list, and it'll generate the URL for you. And it's something that I've always wished other developers would copy, but never have, because it's a really good way to put together a URL scheme, especially if you're not someone who's really used to working with them. Because, if you're trying to do a lot with a URL scheme, it gets complicated fast.
Mhm.
Well, that URL scheme basically hooked into every single piece of Things, and it had been there for years. But this year, Cultured Code took all of those actions that are still available via the URL scheme if you want to use them that way, but they built them right into shortcuts. And they did a lot of work with parameters and predicate filtering to allow you access to do all sorts of things within individual actions. I mean, you can create projects, you can create headings, which are kind of the dividers between sets of tasks inside of a project. You can create the to-dos themselves, and you can, all the metadata that goes along with that can be done within the actions as well. Whether it's a start date, an end date, deadlines, all that kind of stuff can be done right in there. And this is one of the things that I've done, is because I'm not a big fan of the way Things deals with not being able to check off recurring items early. What I've done is I've created a shortcut that is really just a long list of create to do actions that create a series of different tasks that I do every single week. And every one of them is a little different. They go into different projects, they go under different headings, they have different kinds of due dates, and some of them have subtasks, other ones don't. And so that runs on a schedule every Sunday afternoon, and boom, by the time I'm working Monday morning, all these things are already in my task list. They're not recurring because I haven't set them up that way, but they do recur because this shortcut runs every single Sunday and sets it up for me. So you can do all those kind of things. Plus you can duplicate, delete, and edit items. You can open and show lists. Really just about anything you can think of that you can do in the Things app is available now through shortcuts, which really makes this one of my favorite shortcuts updates of 2023 so far.
Yeah, it's really, really well done. Another app that I want to mention, also called Actions, but just Actions. This one I really consider in many ways the spiritual successor to Toolbox Pro. Actions by developer Cinder Soros, whom we've covered before on App Stories. Cinder does really, really excellent work, both on iOS and macOS. This one has actions for all sorts of things. Like if you're a Shortcuts Power user and you're not using actions, you're missing out. It's got actions for really geeky, nerdy things. It's got actions for list manipulation. Like shuffling lists, or reversing the order of lists, or getting the index in a list of a specific item. You have actions for CSV, you have actions for hex colors, you have actions to format text, and a lot more. One of my favorites, get title of URL.
Yes, you taught me about this.
Yes, much more reliable than using any other Apple method. I don't know what Sindra did here, but it's so much better than saying using get name in shortcuts, which is the action made by Apple. Get title of URL. So good. It's got macOS specific actions. There's one called Get Running Apps, which is, of course, something that you cannot do on iPadOS. You can get a list of all the running apps on your computer. And then you can do things with that. Like one of the things that I did before the show to prepare for this segment, I combined Get Running Apps provided by Actions with Choose From List and then Quit App. And so I was able to pick and choose a bunch of apps that were running. I selected the ones I wanted to quit, and the shortcuts quit them for me. So obviously you can combine them in a bunch of different workflows if you want to prepare your workspace or maybe clean out your workspace before you start doing something else. You have actions on the Mac to check if the Wi-Fi is on. So you can also do something clever there. You can get the file icon, which is something so uniquely macOS, and I'm so glad that Actions has an option for it. You also have choose, and this is the last one I will mention, Choose From List Extended. So this is an extended version of the Choose From List action made by Apple, and it gives you options to create custom items while you're picking from a list, and to even have a timeout option, so that if you don't choose an item from a list within, say, 10 seconds, it goes back to the Shortcuts app. So actions for Shortcuts, free to download from the App Store, all platforms, and it gives you really a lot of actions that you can use to take your shortcuts to the next level.
All right, Federico, one of the things that I want to really highlight this year is apps that you wouldn't necessarily expect to have great shortcuts integration, because this is something that I kind of try to do with our giveaways for both Club Mac Stories and in our Club Mac Stories Plus Discord community. And because I really wanted to seek out those apps that were not necessarily productivity oriented, but still did great things with shortcuts. And one of those apps is Albums, which is a music player that's very album oriented. And you don't see very many music players that do much with shortcuts, but Albums does all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can add a tag to the currently playing album, or you can do things like get all sorts of other metadata from the now playing. You can look up who the record label is and when, the year that the album came out. You can tag various albums. And of course, you can do things like play, pause, and shuffle music as well. But I thought that was a really interesting use, and I kind of wish more music players would allow that, because I don't know, maybe you want something as simple as maybe you want a certain kind of music or a certain album to start when you do a certain task, and you can tie that into a shortcut. But there's kind of limited things you can do with shortcuts in music. And I thought this one was interesting, especially because it really digs deep into both the metadata and tagging aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting use case for shortcuts. I was also not expecting music integration. That's a fun one. I want to mention Fantastical. So Fantastical, obviously popular calendar client that we covered many times on Mac Stories. It recently added new shortcuts actions. And one of the things they're doing is obviously they're supporting the predicate filtering of iOS, iPadOS 16, and macOS Ventura. And something you can do with the new action to find, I think it's called Find Fantastical event, you can filter not only by date range using the native predicate filtering. So any date variable is supported there, and you can easily put together a date range. But you can also filter by calendar set. So if you're using calendar sets to organize your different calendars, like your personal calendars, your work calendars, you can now find events by filtering by date and calendar set at the same time. And also there's a new action to create a schedule, which basically prints out like a list in shortcuts, which you later obviously can connect to whatever you want, but it gives you a list of all the events, and if you have enabled tasks, all the events and tasks for any given day. By default, you can do today and tomorrow, but of course, it's a parameter, so you can put in any date variable that you want. And I think this is a good way to, Apple Calendar is one of the best shortcuts integrations out there, and it's good to see a third-party calendar client also offer that sort of support.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Kind of continuing with my theme that I had with albums, I want to mention Book Tracker, which is also one of the giveaways that we did recently for Automation April for Club Mac Stories readers. And Book Tracker is an app for tracking what it sounds like, tracking books, tracking your reading. And with shortcuts, there is a really extensive collection of actions to do everything from finding different things, finding the books, finding authors, finding categories, finding series of books, finding tags. So you can really slice and dice the information in a lot of different ways, but you can also edit all of those things, which I really like. It's not just a matter of creating your own kind of saved searches or search parameters, but you can also edit each of those types of metadata. You can open up books if you've got books in there. I mean, it's mostly for tracking, but I think there's some storage availability there or opening things. You can search for quotes. There's a bunch of different sections of this app too, the open actions allow you to open those sections and view lists and update lists and edit all the metadata. So there's a lot of actions there that if you're if you do a lot of reading and have a big book collection, this is a good way to kind of navigate it without having to poke around extensively inside the app itself.
Very nice. Do you want to close out with a quick rundown of other sort of honorable mentions of apps that have excellent shortcuts integration? Should we do that?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea.
AnyBox, the bookmark manager that lets you save all sorts of links, cross-platform on iPhone, iPad, and macOS. It's got actions to save the contents of the clipboard, save files in addition to links. You can save, this is something you can only do on macOS, you can save the current tab from Safari. You can get all the links in a specific collection. I think just a really good integration for managing links and things you save, and the sort of thing I would love to see Safari reading lists support. This is a much better native alternative to that sort of experience if you're a Safari user. And I also want to mention, of course, Music Box, which is by Marcos Tanaka. We've talked about Music Box before. It does not use predicate filtering, Music Box. However, it's got actions where you can configure parameters to retrieve lists of all the different types of music that you've saved for later, whether they're albums, singles, or EPs. And you can filter by date, you can filter by tag, you can filter by title. And there are also actions to add music. So starting from a Spotify link or an Apple Music link, you can quickly add that to your Music Box queue. And of course, you can also mark items as played. So if you have automations like at the end of the week, after you listen to a bunch of things, you can just select them all in a list and do select, mark as played, and those are marked as seen in Music Box, which I think is a really cool use case for this.
Very nice, very nice. Well, to kind of continue along the theme of food noms, which I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I want to mention Crouton and Pestle because those are both recipe apps that have a long list of shortcuts actions as well to do everything from navigating steps of a recipe to adding recipes either manually or via a URL, doing things like meal planning, and accessing lists of ingredients for recipes too, which comes in handy, maybe coupled with a task manager to create a grocery list and that sort of thing. And then I would close out with mentioning a couple of the Fun Media apps, both Calorie and Waterminder. These are two of Fun Media's older apps. Calorie is a calorie tracker, much like Food Noms in that sense, and Waterminders for tracking your liquid intake, particularly water. And both of these have the ability to do things like log different, in the case of Calorie, food and drinks in a bunch of different ways, and to open up different sections of the app and access your logs. And Waterminder has a little bit narrower scope because it's really just focused on liquids, but it does the same sort of thing, allows you to log things and view your logs as well.
And the last one I want to mention is Surfed. So Surfed, this is actually kind of wild, and it's something that
it is.
I need to spend more time, just like Actions for Obsidian. Surfed is one that I need to spend more time testing and playing around with. So Surfed is a Safari extension that after you give it permission, it can archive your entire Safari browsing history. Just it keeps a running log of all the websites you visit. And of course, later in Shortcuts, you have all these actions that you can use to manage those collected URLs. You can create notes for them. You can tag them. You can access the metadata for a visited web page. But that's not all, because the Shortcuts integration in Surft is pretty wild in the sense that you can create rules. This is why I need to spend more time testing Surft. I believe version 1.4 recently came out. You can create rules where as soon as you visit a specific web page, like a specific domain, something happens in Safari. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, you can create a rule that when you visit, club.macstories.net/something specific, a shortcut of your choice is automatically triggered and it launches in the Shortcuts app. This has a lot of potential, this idea of like creating rules for automation inside Safari, that it's a different type of Shortcuts integration than the ones we mentioned today. But I want to play around with this because I don't know, my mind is going there. Like I'm thinking about this. Hey, maybe I could do some fancy rules for when I open a Discord link and something happens in Safari. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because maybe you take that Discord link and you convert it to the club version of the link that we created, or maybe you have a particular site that you want to archive everything you read from it, and it will automatically store it in something like Keep It or DevonThink. Both of those apps have shortcut actions as well. All right, Federico, that's it for this week's episode of App Stories. I want to thank our sponsor again, and that is Viso, the beautiful minimal image viewer for Mac OS. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. We're also both on Mastodon. You can go to vitici.macstories.net to find a button to follow Federico on Mastodon, and johnvorhees.macstories.net to do the same for me. We're also both on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.